Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of May, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today, we have Vanessa Beeley in Damascus and Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, both. We're going to get started today with the infected blood inquiry report. And of course, this came out on Monday. And as I was driving home on Monday evening, I had the delight of listening to Rishi Sunak's presentation in the House of Commons on this. This is the comment that Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the inquiry, made, or at least one of the comments that he made. He said that this was not an accident. He said it was a conspiracy, but not in the sense of a handful of people plotting in an orchestrated conspiracy to mislead, but in a way that was more subtle, more pervasive, and more chilling in its implications. So 30,000 people across the UK infected with contaminated blood. More than 3,000 people have died so far. Others heading in that direction, sadly. The main names for criticism here were Kenneth Clarke, of course. We should remember that Kenneth Clarke at the time was on the steering committee for the Bilderberg Group. I'm not suggesting that that's related. That's just for background. We'll be talking about the Bilderberg Group again a little bit later. He was health minister in Margaret Thatcher's government, and the Thatcher government itself heavily criticised as well. Treloar School criticised because they were haemophiliac children that were sent to the school that had an on-site NHS clinic, and so they were supposed to be getting as near a normal childhood as possible. And then the NHS themselves receiving quite a bit of criticism. And rightly so. Now, as I said, I was listening to Rishi Sunak on the way home on Monday evening, and I regret to say I am going to play a little bit of this because, I would suggest that his demeanour and his delivery could only be perhaps competed with by Matt Hancock. Let's have a listen.
Today I want to speak directly to the victims and their families, some of whom are with us in the gallery. I want to make a wholehearted and unequivocal apology for this terrible injustice. First, to apologise for the failure in blood policy and blood products, and the devastating and so often fatal impact this had on so many lives, including the impact of treatments that were known or proved to be contaminated. The failure to respond to the risk of imported concentrates, the failure to prioritise self-sufficiency in blood, the failure to introduce screening services sooner, and the mismanagement of the response to the emergence of AIDS and hepatitis viruses amongst infected blood victims. Second, to apologise for the repeated failure of the state and our medical professionals to recognise the harm caused. This includes the failure of previous payment schemes, the inadequate levels of funding made available, and the failure to recognise hepatitis B victims. And third, to apologise for the institutional refusal to face up to these failings, and worse, to deny and even attempt to cover them up. The dismissing of reports and campaigners' detailed representations, the loss and destruction of key documents, including ministerial advice and medical records, and the appalling length of time it took to secure the public inquiry which has delivered the full truth today. Mr. Speaker, layer upon layer of hurt endured across decades. This is an apology from the state to every single person impacted by this scandal. It did not have to be this way. It should never have been this way. And on behalf of this and every government stretching back to the 1970s, I am truly sorry.
So I'm sorry to show so much of that, but keep those words in mind as we continue here. Now we have a bit of an exclusive because this is June Rain's comments from the MHRA board meeting yesterday.
As you quite rightly say, this is the issue that is at the forefront of all our minds today. And throughout the infected blood inquiry, we have been listening carefully to the enormously distressing experience of so many individuals and their families and we offer our full and heartfelt sympathy to all of those who have suffered so much. We are absolutely determined to demonstrate that the healthcare products regulatory system has learned from these individuals and their wholly unacceptable experiences. The government will be studying the report and its recommendations in very great detail now before returning to Parliament with a full and considered response. I think what we need to say today is that patients and families can have confidence in today's rigorous regulatory standards, and that the UK has one of the safest blood supply services in the world. Patient safety is our first priority, our highest priority. While no blood or blood product can ever be completely without risk, the stringent regulations that we have in place today are designed to prevent viruses being transmitted through blood or blood products. So the board, as you say, will be returning in the future to this issue.
So that is quite an incredible statement from June Rain, because while she's saying that lessons have been learned and it's not going to be repeated, and we should have confidence in the regulatory regime. In the meantime, they're not testing blood for spike protein, for example. Well, we can go on with this. Here's Rishi Sunak again. Coming back to him, he went on to say, today, their voices have finally been heard. The full truth stands for all to see. He used this term, the full truth, on multiple occasions. Not just the truth, but the full truth. And we'll work together across government, our health services and civil society, ensure that nothing like this can ever happen in our country again. So the question is, what is the MHRA doing to make sure that blood products are safe today? Because I suggest that they're not doing very much, certainly not with respect to potential contamination post-vaccination. And then we have the issue of midazolam and morphine use. What's being done about that within the NHS, and so on. So there are many questions about whether the government has actually learned any lessons here, whether there's any sincerity in anything that's been said by either Rishi Sunak or June Rain. I suspect there is none. And I suspect that many of our viewers and listeners will agree with that statement. We'll talk a little bit more about this in Extra, and I've no doubt that Debbie will be wanting to say more about it on Friday. But let's move on. Vanessa, let me welcome you to the programme. And of course, the other big news from the beginning of the week was the decision by the ICC prosecutor to bring charges against Benjamin Netanyahu, or at least to attempt to.
Yes, so the request has been issued for warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Minister of War Yoav Gallant, and 4 members of Hamas leadership, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Diab, Ibrahim al-Masri, and Ismail Haniyeh. Interesting that the pretext for the warrants with regards to the Israeli leadership does not mention genocide. And for the Hamas leadership, it does mention the debunked claims of rape and torture on October the 7th. Now, I just want to show an interview that Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan had with the CNN in the last couple of days, where he talks about threats that have been issued against him.
This situation, unfortunately, lies on the San Andreas fault of international politics and strategic interests. And of course, I've had some elected leaders speak to me and be very blunt. This court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin, was what one senior leader told me. We don't view it like that. This court is the legacy of Nuremberg. This court is a sad indictment of humanity. This court should be the triumph of law over power and brute force. Grab what you can, take what you want, do what you will, and we're going to simply be we're not going to be dissuaded by threats.
Quite extraordinary. I mean, this takes you back to when John Bolton threatened Jose Bustani, the first OPCW chief, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, prior to the 2003 Iraq illegal invasion by the United States. And then just moving on, reported in Axios, the House Speaker in the US, Mike Johnson, said Monday that the House may vote on sanctions against the International Criminal Court for issuing or seeking, an arrest warrant against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And that has been supported by a number of bipartisan senators, including Tom Cotton, senator for Arkansas, who went on Twitter saying, equating Israel's democratically elected leaders with perpetrators of the worst attack on Jews since World War II shows what a farce the International Criminal Court is. Mr. Khan's kangaroo court has no jurisdiction in Israel to pursue these anti-Semitic and politically motivated charges. My colleagues and I look forward to making sure neither Khan and his associates nor their families will ever set foot again in the United States. And then let's just roll an excerpt of a video interview with Tom Cotton when he's talking about imposing the sanctions.
I do have legislation that would impose sanctions on this rogue prosecutor and those in his office who have not just targeted Prime Minister Netanyahu now, but also in the past have targeted American soldiers as well. We're working with the Republican leadership in the House to try to pass that bill promptly and hopefully force Chuck Schumer's hand to bring it up in the Senate, because he also condemned the International Criminal Court today. But I would just say the only reason we have to pursue this legislation is that Joe Biden reversed Donald Trump's decision to sanction this very office and this very court in the past. This is a rogue court that Congress has previously given the president power to stand up to. Joe Biden hasn't used that power, Donald Trump did.
Extraordinary. I mean, it wasn't a rogue court when it was successfully prosecuting Putin for war crimes in Ukraine.
Or Milosevic.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. So it's incredible how it becomes a rogue court suddenly when it takes on Israel. And I have to say that right now, I have to make the statement that anybody that is denying genocide in Gaza and in Palestine as a whole, they've checked out of humanity. And I include among those Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who had this interview with The Hill only, I think, 4 days ago. So let's just play a section of that.
You know, I don't believe that there's a genocide going on, and I don't think Israel's intention is genocide. I don't believe there's any evidence of genocide. There is genocide going on in the Mideast, but it's a genocide of Jews, and it's a genocide of Christians, and nobody's complaining about it for some reason. And there are much worse wars than what's happening in Gaza right now, but for some reason, people don't want to complain unless it's Jews who can be blamed. The idea of saying that there's a genocide going on in Israel because people die in war.
I do have to make the point that the ethnic cleansing of Christians in the region is largely down to the West's sponsorship of the terrorist groups, particularly here in Syria. And I just wanted to show a very short excerpt of a 11, 12-minute report on the actual genocide in Gaza. And there's nothing distressing in it, other than for me, of course, because Khan Yunis is an area that I visited when I was in Gaza. It was one of the most vibrant areas of Gaza, the most fantastic fruit farms and agricultural areas. So let's just play this short section of the longer report that you can find on my Telegram channel. Thanks, mate.
الأوف السقف
فاتحين لكم في السقف فتحة؟
هني أم كفر استشهد أبوي
واستشهد؟
استشهد معاه 16 نفر استشهد في الصيف.
I'm going with Ismail and Hamdan to the roof of their home and they're going to show me a lot of things as they said.
Before the genocide, they were not able to see the sea. Now everything is destroyed so they can see it.
هاي خرطت تتعنع فيها قرص نفرح. هاي القناص كان قاعد.
ايش صار؟
القناص قاعد طلعي.
القناص كان قاعد هان؟
كان بطق على الناس.
ايش لاقى القناص؟ ايش لقيت وراه؟
هاي رصاص. طيب شوف.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vanessa. Charles, let's come on to the UK and the International Criminal Court Act.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, all. Yes, just a very brief addendum to Vanessa's excellent segment. And we see that we're determined to push on with this. But just a reminder, really, or recap, I have touched on this in the past, but the International Criminal Court Act 2001 on the UK statute book has within it section 52, which refers to conduct ancillary to genocide and so forth. So essentially, when we consider all the statements made in Parliament and by various members of the government, it's worth bearing in mind that it is an offence against the law of England and Wales for a person to engage in conduct ancillary to an act which this section applies. So that goes through the various acts of genocide and war crimes, and it doesn't matter whether or not the act is committed within or without the United Kingdom. So I just wanted to sort of pop that up as a reminder. Now that the pressure is on internationally, there should be further scrutiny, which was of course missing at the time, on those that have said and done acts and statements and the rest of it to support what Israel has done. And there'll be a greater deal of significance to this, bearing in mind what the ICC is now doing.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Okay, staying with you then, let's come back to the UK and farming.
Yes, indeed. Quite a bit to get through. So we'll start with the last week's unveiling of a package to support UK farmers. They're making a big sort of fanfare about this, but I think it's worth pointing out that at £80 million, I know it's sort of like-for-like comparison, but that amounts to less than 10% of the funding commitment to Ukraine. Still, what sort of thing have they been talking about? Well, really, it's all focused on sort of innovation and going to be putting up greenhouses, particularly the horticultural sector, fruit and vegetables, and increasing yields and growing things out of season. And also particularly a focus on genetic engineering. And it's worth reminding viewers and listeners that the precision breeding bill, which came in last year, had the very active support of the National Farmers Union. So I think that's one of those things that should be considered. And of course, there's absolutely no content about nutrient density, about the stresses on the various plants in growing them out of season, and of course on the various requirements and chemical inducements that will be required to produce crops of this sort. So not just that, but also no mention of bioavailability, effectively the body's ability to actually recover nutrients from a particular food source. So really the focus is only on yield by volume, by weight, which is a very clumsy mechanism when you're considering the health of the nation, which of course they are not particularly. The other thing, following great pressure from UK column, is that they've introduced now a food security index, which we'll just take a quick look at. This has started literally just now last week, and contained within this is a sort of a risk appraisal in which effectively what they're doing is setting the scene, or rather orchestrating a particular narrative so that everybody but DEFRA is to blame when there is food shortage later on in the year. But you see here they're pointing towards international volatility, climate change and biodiversity loss, by which they mean a wrecked economy through COVID policy, climate change based on no science at all, and biodiversity loss through poor farming practices and the introduction of chemicals and pharmaceutical products that shouldn't be there. But also they go on to talk about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is a recurring theme. And just to point out the way in which this is being manipulated, we see here a graph pointing towards energy and fertilizer prices and how steeply they've risen. And of course, Russia and Ukraine, or rather Russia in particular, always gets the blame for this. But note that the price increase has happened well before the beginning of 2022. This is actually stated, but I suppose they're sort of hoping that nobody's really going to fluff to it. So both electricity and gas prices climbed significantly from mid-2020 onwards, doubling for electricity and nearly tripling for gas, of course, suggesting that Russia was responsible for this entirely is disingenuous. And then they say that fertilizer prices also surged from mid-2020. Now, just to complicate matters even further, but again, to go back to what UK column has been covering this year, solar projects must fit in with food security. So food security, of course, is now becoming a buzzy topic. And this again came out last week, 15th of May, just the day after the previous announcement. And they've been in hot water effectively because there have been accusations of solar farms being put in places that really food should be grown. But again, they bang the same drum with growing geopolitical tension and solar continuing to play a key part in the government's plans for energy security and net zero. And also that the planning authorities must now consider cumulative impacts where several proposals for solar projects come forward in the same area. I've highlighted must consider because it doesn't go so far as to say that they actually need to do anything about it other than consider it. But what I want to lay alongside this is a statement made by John Pettigrew, the chief executive of the National Grid, who has posted on his LinkedIn page a talk that he gave about what he calls the supergrid. So effectively, he's talking about overlaying a network onto the national grid to be able to significantly upscale the output from the national grid. But interestingly, what he points to in particular is future growth in foundational technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum computing will mean larger scale, energy intensive computing infrastructure. And he goes on to say demand from commercial data centers will increase sixfold just in the next 10 years. He goes on to talk about this being a pivotal moment and all the rest of it. But the point really to bear in mind is that whilst on the one hand, we've got the government insistence that we can meet an energy target, which is going to be driven by renewable energy. And of course, we know that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, or indeed the wind blows too hard, we can't recover energy from those sources. But also the insistence that through innovation in farming and the use of AI, we will be able to do all these things at the same time. And yet we have the head of the national grid telling us exactly why it's going to be very difficult to meet those shortfalls because of the increase in AI, which is demanding more and more and more power. So that's on the sort of DEFRA, what they're doing side. The other thing is we return to avian influenza, and in particular, the preparation for this autumn's pandemic. So again, please stay tuned because this very, very much refers to humans. The guidance on reporting dead birds has just been updated, which has happened very infrequently since it was first introduced over a decade ago. But specifically, they're saying this is how you should use the service, and it'll help you to understand how diseases are spreading. So they'll ask you where you found the dead birds and all the rest of it. But the point of this is, of course, that they may be collected and tested for bird flu or another cause of death. Well, I can tell you absolutely for sure that they will only be testing for bird flu because that's all they want to find. They're not in the least bit interested in any other environmental factor, because I wrote a Freedom of Information request and had that in black and white. That is all they test for. So, of course, it's no great surprise to learn that they have a bird flu vaccination task force. Now, what do you think they're up to? Well, the Health Security Agency are pushing the boundaries of vaccine research and development. Sounds a bit ominous, but what they say is that they have an agreement with CSL Seqirus, who will be on standby to produce over 100 million influenza pandemic vaccines tailored to the specific strain, of course, if needed. Now, where on earth has this come from and who are CSL? Well, they describe themselves as being leaders in influenza, which could be interpreted in one of two ways. But they talk about considering pandemic preparedness. And the bit I want to draw your attention to is the highlighted text here, really, which is saying that the current outbreak of H5N1 that began in 21 is the largest recorded in history and is causing concern due to the increased mammalian infections from infected birds, the recent zoonosis of H5N1 and death of a child from the disease in Cambodia is a stark reminder of the risk posed by an influenza pandemic. Now, that is exactly how they are prefixing this. And so the whole world, they are suggesting, may be affected by something that they are stating has killed one child in the entire world. And I should just remind you also that this illness only exists in a laboratory. The testing can only operate in a laboratory. And so all of this is, in effect, an exercise in modelling and computer-generated genetic sequences. But it absolutely looks like this is coming down the track for the autumn to be introduced into, or at least the suggestion that it will be introduced into the poultry population. Of course, this coincides with the registration of poultry for all keepers, but also the suggestion that you personally are also at risk.
Charles, thanks very much. Many parallels with the last few years. Now, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, you can do that at support.ukcolumn.org. We do need your support very much. Please do help us out if you can. You could pick some or share material on the various platforms, ukcolumn.org, ukcolumnextracts.co.uk especially. And another reminder that, of course, we apparently are off Facebook now. If you'd like to pick something up at the UK Column shop, there's plenty to have a look at there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. Now, a quick reminder of the interview that I did with Michael Siegel called Conservation of Education. It's on the UK Column website at the moment. If you haven't seen that at the moment, it's had a really positive response from people that have seen it so far. Please go and have a look at that. The interview tomorrow is with Ruth O'Rafferty from the Scottish Vaccine Injury Group. And we really do encourage you to join us for that 1 p.m. in the usual places and to share that afterwards. And also to remind you that the symposium that we ran on Sunday is available on the UK Column website if you haven't seen that at the moment. Now, sadly, we've had to postpone the mRNA vaccine symposium that we're planning to host on the 30th of May. We'll keep you posted for the new date on that. And then an advertisement for an event taking place in Scotland. This is on Sunday, June the 2nd, with respect to vaccine injured, and Classic Grand is the place. Tickets available at the details on screen at the moment. And a final reminder that this weekend is Stand in the Light. Charles will be there, Ryan will be there, a number of other UK Column members and staff will be there. So if you're going to that, we all look forward to seeing you. So now let's move on then to Julian Assange. And of course, on Monday, it was announced that he was going to be given leave to appeal. If we can put that on screen. This is WikiLeaks. An important, if partial, victory is how it was being described. So this is perhaps a positive development. I put that caveat on there because, of course, what has been happening in the United States, in particular over the last couple of months, is that people have been ramping up the pressure on Joe Biden to do something about Assange, to drop this entire thing before the election, in the presidential election in the United States. Not only does this result effectively mean that Julian Assange has to spend another 6 months or so in prison before an appeal can even be brought, because there has to be preparation for that appeal, but it is going to push the can down the road far enough that this probably will not be a major election event, which I think is unfortunate. Vanessa, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, we talked about this last night, and I totally agree with your reading of it. It's definitely, political motivation behind it and manipulation, and it's horrible.
Yes. Okay, well, sticking with you then, let's talk about the latest developments in Iran following the crash of the helicopter which killed the president.
Yes, well, obviously, yesterday was the actual funeral in Tabriz and Qom, and today is the procession in Tehran. And I have to say, seeing the videos playing out on social media, particularly on Telegram channels, there are millions on the streets. So I just wanted to have a quick look, obviously, at the context around when the helicopter crash happened. So it came almost concurrently with the Americans arrested after leading the coup to overthrow the government in Congo, as the US vows to cooperate in investigation. Turkey's president holds emergency meeting, admits coup warning. That was on the 15th of May. Macron is heading to New Caledonia as protests gather momentum. And there was an alleged assassination threat against President Vučić in Serbia. And of course, we had the attempted assassination. He's still not fully out of the woods of Slovakia's Prime Minister Fico. and also the problems in Georgia that Alex has been reporting on. So then if we have a look at Sergei Lavrov's statement, he's basically initially blaming US aviation sanctions, including against Iran, ban on the supply of spare parts, put people at risk. US deliberately harmed ordinary citizens. So that's basically the stance that he's taking at the moment. Let's have a look at how Western media, which I have to say has been absolutely shameful in its reporting of this tragedy for Iranian people. Here's the BBC talking about fireworks in Tehran celebrating the death of President Raisi, even before the death had actually been declared, and social media posts. And I have to say, I saw the social media commentary, and it's very similar to kind of the NATO 77th Brigade, the same tweet being tweeted out multiple times. But let's have a look. First of all, let's verify the BBC report on fireworks in Tehran. This is Abbas Juma, who is a journalist and historian who was in Tehran. And if we can just play the second clip also, Mike, because of course what they're also claiming is, inflaming the entire women's rights issue also. So if we can play the two clips concurrently.
Я нахожусь в данный момент в Тегеране, на площади Валиасар, где собрались люди. Собрались, сами знаете, по какому поводу. Как вы видите, никаких салютов, никакой радости. Люди напряжены, люди в ожидании новостей. Давайте пройдемся и посмотрим все своими глазами.
So there's no audio with this one?
So this is basically just demonstrating the fact that many of the women that were in Tehran were not wearing hijab and were totally unmolested for being without hijab. And that's something that I also remarked on when I spent 2 weeks in Iran in 2022. So I wanted to have a look. A lot of the Western media is also talking about the fact that even Raisi's replacement is likely to continue the development of relations with the East, particularly China and Russia, which of course is an absolute anathema to Western global supremacy. But this particular article caught my attention, which was in the Telegraph opinion section. The West must strike now and collapse the Iranian regime. The vulnerabilities of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei succession plan are now on full display. So it's written by Mark Wallace and Kesra Arabi. So let's have a look at who they are. So Ambassador Mark T. Wallace is the CEO of United Against Nuclear Iran and a former ambassador to the United Nations. Kesra Arabi is director of IRGC research at United Against Nuclear Iran. So let's just have a quick look at what they're saying. This is an opening that should be exploited. We must support the Iranian people's democratic ambitions to bring an end to a regime that kills its own people, seeks to eradicate the world's only Jewish state, and exports terror around the world. Instead of offering condolences to the regime, as EU officials have shamelessly done, the West should be focusing on the Iranian people and its public diplomacy. It should be amplifying the calls of the Iranian people for an end to the Islamic Republic. Simultaneously, the US government and its allies should consider covert operations, both cyber and kinetic, to exacerbate the divisions within the regime's elite and embolden the Iranian people against the regime. Make no mistake, the collapse of the Islamic Republic will be the single most liberating event for the Iranian people. So I think that's pretty clear in its agenda. But let's have a look at this organization, United Against Nuclear Iran. It claims it's a non-profit and non-partisan policy organization formed to combat the threats posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, not mentioning, of course, the threat from a nuclear Israel. But let's have a look at who's on the board. It's quite fascinating. It's packed full of intel figures and personalities. Also, Mike, from the UK Ministry of Defence. and intelligence agencies. But of course, we have John Bolton that I mentioned in the previous report. But Zohar Palti, who was a former director of the spy agency Mossad. And if we go on, the original co-founders also include Meir Dagan, the former general director of Mossad. So I think conflict of interest comes into play. I also wanted to play a section of an interview between Syed Mohammad Marandi, a historian and professor in Tehran, and with the awful Piers Morgan. I've basically edited out Piers Morgan because I don't want to inflict that on people. But this is a section of Syed Mohammad Marandi basically schooling Piers Morgan, and there's very little that I can disagree with in what he says. So let's play this.
What you're saying is inaccurate, to say the least. I would say the butchers are in London, in Washington, the people who destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen during the disgraceful genocide there, the dirty war in Syria, the destruction of Libya, the sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba. I think that the real monsters are actually much more closer to home. He wasn't executing people. He was in the judiciary at the time, and the people who you're alluding to, and the numbers are far less than what you claim, they're actually, this is something that your government should be ashamed of. These are people who fought against Iran. They fought for Saddam Hussein as foot soldiers. They betrayed the country. They carried out bomb attacks in this country, killing up to 17,000 people, including a president, a prime minister, and a head of judiciary. Bomb explosion near my house when I was a school student. I was getting ready to go to school. It killed 9 to 11 people, including an Armenian family of 4. These are the people who you're saying they were murdered by Iranians. No, in Iran, no one has any sympathy for the MEK terrorist organization, which today has a major base in Albania, and it has offices across Europe and North America. So it is your government that's supporting terrorism. It is your government and your governments that are really the brutal regime.
As I said, I can't argue with anything that he said there. The entire interview will be in the show notes for people to watch. Iranians flood the streets in remembrance of Ibrahim Raisi and, of course, Foreign Minister Amir Abdollahian and the crew members that were also killed in the crash. And I have to say again that the videos showing on social media today are quite extraordinary. Millions have taken to the streets, not only in Tehran, but in villages and towns throughout Iran. Yesterday, I attended a ceremony at the Iranian embassy, but of course the consulate part was bombed by Israel last month, beginning of April. There were many dignitaries present, including in the photo there, His Excellency Jose Biamorgi, the ambassador of Venezuela. And finally, for impact on resistance axis leaders, very sad news that the First Lady of Syria, Asma al-Assad, has now, having survived cancer and come back from that, she's now been diagnosed with leukemia and is about to undergo some pretty heavy treatment. So we wish her well.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Now let's come to Europe again. And well, Klaus Schwab has said he's off. Well, sort of off. Of course, 85 years old, leader of the World Economic Forum. Everybody knows who he is. Well, he has decided that he will no longer be the executive chairman. He will become a non-executive chairman instead. So taking a step back at least. So who's going to replace him? It looks like it's not going to be Tony Blair after all. It's going to be this guy, Borge Brende, who is currently president of the World Economic Forum Executive Board, former foreign minister of Norway. He's going to take over from Klaus. But who's this guy? Well, it turns out he is on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. So here's the current Bilderberg meetings website and the current steering committee. Let's just bring a few names on screen. It does include Mr. Brende. Let's see who else is on here. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England and current sort of climate change aficionado. John Soares, the prior C, head of MI6, is on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. So these are all colleagues. And Peter Thiel is on there. I just chose a few names from it. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, well, his name escapes me, so I'll pass over that particular comment. But anyway, just find it extremely interesting that particular person has been chosen to lead the World Economic Forum. So, Charles, let's come back to you and a little bit more on weather modification.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, a topic that sort of lurks in the background in some way or other. And I want to introduce this particular segment by talking about an organisation that both Ben and Debbie have focused on to some degree in the last few months, and that is ARIA, or at least I would pronounce it as ARIA. It might be pronounced as ARIA, but the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, which has been given a whacking great £800 million by government to do essentially whatever it likes. But among its chosen tasks are managing our climate and weather through responsible engineering. So just to go back a little bit to what it is that spawned ARIA, and that's the Advanced Research and Invention Agency Act of 2022. Just a couple of sort of slightly unusual things in it. They may be able to do anything that they like in the exercise of its functions. In particular, they may borrow money, acquire and dispose of land, form and participate in partnerships and joint ventures and form companies. Okay, fair enough. But also they may accept gifts, which seems an unusual power to have, if you can call it a power. But also on the national security side, the Secretary of State may give ARIA directions as to the exercise of its functions if the Secretary of State considers it necessary or expedient in the interests of national security. Now, that I think is worth concentrating on because, of course, national security, when pushed, can encompass almost anything. But of course, the power to give directions under this section includes power to vary or revoke a direction, and ARIA must comply with the direction given under this section. So I think that's one to consider for the future. But back to weather modification. And Google have decided that they want to weigh into this particular subject area with what they're calling Project Contrails. And what exactly does that mean? Well, they're talking about yet another AI project using Google AI to help airlines prevent contrails. Well, why? Planes don't always make contrails. Contrails only occur when planes fly through humid regions. If planes intentionally avoid flying through these regions, then they can avoid creating warming contrails with minimal impact on fuel usage. They go on to say the challenge is knowing where these regions will occur. By combining massive quantities of weather data, lost my place. They can create state-of-the-art predictions of when and where contrails are likely to form. Pilots and dispatchers can then use this information to adjust the altitudes of their flights. And finally, Google give a little illustration here of what's in a contrail. When a plane flies through the humid areas, the soot from the exhaust can sometimes nucleate small droplets and form ice. Now, the reason I bring this up is that a few weeks ago, I spoke about the Marine Cloud Brightening Program being run by the University of Washington off the west coast of the United States. And essentially, there just seems to be an awful lot going on with very little information coming. What we did find out from that was that the University of Exeter was involved, albeit somewhat obliquely. But I want to point out now that the University of Reading is describing change climates and how they're pushing the boundaries of understanding the atmosphere. And they go on to talk about pioneering the science behind the weather. Again, I'm not quite sure how we're meant to interpret that, but they show how humans are altering the climate, and also their discoveries might one day help people to change the weather too. So they are sort of pushing on with this agenda, and I would just sort of refer you back to the Science and Technology Committee report from 2009-10, in which it was specified that in the definition of geoengineering, weather techniques such as cloud seeding should not be included within the definition of geoengineering used for the purposes of activities designed to effect a change in the global climate and so on. Of course, in that same report, they talk about their priority being to tackle climate change at source, but they recognise, however, that geoengineering might have a possible role to play. Of course, by that, they appear to mean things other than cloud seeding. But nonetheless, public engagement, they talk about as being an important issue. And so I just want to round off by pointing out that there is a petition open at the moment to government to make all forms of geoengineering affecting the environment illegal. Now, I think this petition, for the sake of simplicity, does include any form of weather modification. And of course, as you'll be aware, even though the response is very, very rarely even adequate, if such a petition reaches 100,000 signatures, it does have to be debated in Parliament. So whilst you might perceive that petitions are in some way a futile exercise, they do at least create an audit trail, and they do create pressure where none previously existed. So I would encourage you to take a look at that petition at least.
Well, I would say, Charles, I would add to that by saying they not only create an audit trail and an obligation on Parliament if the target is met, they are useful in the sense of being an organisational tool, so they can be used to promote a particular topic to people that may not otherwise be engaged in that. So we shouldn't just write them off completely. I mean, I appreciate that the principle of petitions and asking your captors effectively, or your farmers, to do the right thing by you isn't necessarily going to work, but they have a use nonetheless. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, quite right. No, I mean, I would perfectly agree. And I think really the volume of literature now and material that's out there on weather modification, I think does deserve more attention, but it needs to be brought into the realms of the public debate. And I think that, the central question really is if the government's claiming that it does not have any intent to do any of these things, then why on earth is it funding so many research projects that look into exactly this issue?
Indeed. Well, look, I would like to just very quickly introduce everybody now to what a slightly tongue-in-cheek thing in one sense, but not in the other, and that we've decided to call UKC Verify, and we're doing this really to poke a stick at the BBC. So let's just bring the first example of this on. We're going to fact check this article. So the tragic story that appeared yesterday of the flight to Singapore, where one passenger has passed away, a guy called Jeff Kitchen, as a result of an aircraft flying through some pretty severe turbulence. And he has apparently had a heart attack, but a lot of other people on the aircraft were injured as a result because they were not wearing seatbelts or whatever. But quite in itself a tragic event. But in the global scheme of things, it was surprising to me last night because I happened to be in the car at 7 p.m. when the news came on. It surprised me that the BBC was leading with this story. So it only surprised me, however, for about 30 seconds because, of course, in the course of the story, they brought on somebody that they described as an expert, who then told us that because of human-created climate change, there were many more of these types of turbulence events happening. So anyway, the BBC then followed up with this article today. What is flight turbulence and why does it happen? So they seem to be walking back slightly from their position here. So this is one of the things they're saying. This means skies are busier, making a pilot's decision and avoiding turbulence trickier, as they have to maintain a safe minimum distance from aircraft in the area. I'm going to say that is, I think that's possibly not entirely accurate, but okay. They then went on to say that Guy Grattan suggests that we are encountering turbulence more, adding that other reasons for this may be the fact that we are flying more. The other reasons that they mention in this article being a scientific paper which suggests that there is more turbulence happening as a result of man-made global warming. But in fact, if you go to the National Transport Safety Board, they have a document here, preventing turbulence-related injuries in air carrier operations conducted under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 121. And they're very clear in this document that there has been no change since 1989 in this graph. So it says here, Figure 6 shows yearly trends in Part 121 accident rates from 1989 through 2018. After normalizing the data by annual flight hours, so the scale on the y-axis is accidents per 100,000 flight hours. So after normalizing the data by annual flight hours, there was no obvious trend over time for turbulence-related Part 121 accidents during this period. And you can see very clearly the dark blue line is basically horizontal all the way across those years. So the suggestion that climate change is causing more turbulence events is not borne out by the data. And for the BBC to use this story in order to push a climate change agenda seems to me to be a pretty cynical thing to do. So that we'll leave it with that. That's the first UKC Verify report so far. There will be many more coming in the days and weeks to follow. Charles, let's move on to Hansard now and the Fetal Sentience Committee bill.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, this is something I've spoken about briefly before. It was introduced to the House of Lords by Lord Moylan, and his perception is that it's been completely hijacked, and effectively his bill, or at least his move on the bill, has been used as a proxy for a debate really about abortion. And so what we'll do is just go through a few of the tweets that he sent out about this bill. He says that he's pretty gutted that his private member's bill has been wrecked by amendments tabled by Lady Thornton and Lady Liz Barker on behalf of Labour and Lib Dem front benches. The amendment means there's no parliamentary time to pass the bill, brackets, which is their intention. The bill would have set up an independent expert committee to examine evidence of human fetal sentience and advise the government. It did nothing more than that. Debate at the second reading fell well below the standard of the UK House of Lords, with both noble ladies making exaggerated claims about attacks on abortion rights. They were clear they didn't want better scientific understanding in case it disturbed their ideological commitment. Even more remarkably, neither noble lady was speaking in a personal capacity. Both were representing their party on the front bench, and they have gone on to table wrecking amendments, presumably also in their official party capacity. It's unusual for a private member's bill to be wrecked in this way, since most expire of natural causes without having to be torpedoed by amendments. So what does it say about a putative Labour government that they seem to have officially gone out of their way to put ideology before science on this most sensitive topic? So obviously, Lord Moylan there not mincing his words, and we will have a look at exactly what it is he's referring to, because these amendments were indeed put forward, you see there, by Baronesses Thornton, Barker and Deach, and specifically, as I said, the references to abortion. So clause 1, they want to insert after the word knowledge and the legal rights of women during pregnancy and birth, including but not limited to and in relation to abortion, medical decision-making and birth choices. And also to insert, the committee may not provide advice which seek to alter or rely upon altering abortion law, regulation or practice, and to insert that the committee may not provide advice which seeks to limit or relies upon limiting women's existing legal rights to decision-making regarding their own healthcare and choices during pregnancy and birth. Now, finally, to insert, save that no response shall be provided regarding advice in topic areas on which the government declines to take a policy position. So they've pushed very hard to, as he says, torpedo this bill. And indeed, the writing was on the wall from earlier on when debated back in March, because it was Baroness Kennedy at that point, who we see on screen here, that spoke in that debate and said the following: "When I saw this bill on our prospectus, I was immediately suspicious. It follows close on the heels of an effort during the Public Order Bill to enable protests on the doorstep of abortion clinics." Now, of course, that's not accurate, but she goes on, "Happily, that effort failed, and it was agreed that buffer zones were necessary. The amendment would have allowed people who totally opposed the termination of a pregnancy to harass women as they entered clinics for medical attention." Well, this is a very, very one-sided view of what the Public Order Act either did do or was going to do. And we've spoken at quite great length about the buffer zones and the extraordinary raft of powers that local authorities are granted by them. But nonetheless, she went on in her speech to say, why am I concerned? The politics of the United States of America is riven with divisions on the issue of abortion. For many decades, it has been weaponized by far-right, deeply misogynistic organizations calling themselves Christian, which oppose women's right to reproductive freedom. I always say, follow the money. Dark money has surged into the United Kingdom's anti-abortion groups in recent years. Well, she really has not left anybody in any doubt as to what she thought, but I have to say that a lot of what she said is not very well substantiated, if at all, particularly concerning the legislation surrounding the buffer zones that she refers to. But just to look at the other side of the coin, on Twitter, the Right to Life UK has brought up the remarks of Lady Lawler, saying that she reveals the real reason why the abortion lobby groups strongly oppose the Fetal Sentence Committee Bill. Opponents of a committee, and this is to quote her, fear that it will, as the science develops, find more and more evidence that fetuses, as they like to regard them, are indeed prenatal babies able to feel pain from an early stage, and that abortion is merely premature infanticide. Yet, however strong their views, they should not try to bury evidence that goes against them. They should be willing for the scientific picture to be fully understood and presented in all its nuances to policy makers. So, interesting to hear remarks given on the other side of the debate. But of course, with the bill having been hijacked by the abortion issue, which of course, if we're to take his word for it, was absolutely not at all the intention of Lord Moylan, it does give us the chance to look at abortion in the United Kingdom and the latest statistics that we can get hold of, which are now in some way quite out of date, because I bring up here the fact that in actual fact, the most recent statistics are now delayed from the 22nd of June 2023 until the 23rd of May 2024. Now, that is a significant delay. Now, and they say that it's due to form processing. But given what we know about the extraordinary advice given to pregnant women and indeed women trying to conceive during the period where the COVID vaccines were being rolled out, it seems an extraordinary coincidence that there should be quite such a delay in these sorts of statistical announcements. Nonetheless, working with what we do have, we see that the graph going back to 2021 points very, very sharply upwards. And indeed, partial statistics released last year going back for 2022, the light green showing the figures by month for the year 2022 in comparison to the year before in 2021. Now, Baroness Kennedy talks about dark money. Now, that was an interesting phrase to use, but of course it's because she is effectively quoting from an article in the Good Law Project, Dark Money Uncovered, in which they say spending in the UK has surged from 390,000 in 2020 to 770,000 in 2022. In recent months, the ADF have provided legal support to protesters in Birmingham and Bournemouth arrested within buffer zones, which are designed to protect vulnerable women when they are seeking abortion care. So just to remind you, if you're not completely au fait with the idea of the buffer zones, is effectively where people have been arrested for praying silently in their heads outside abortion clinics. And of course, the law specifies that you're not to have a view one way or the other, either in favour of or against abortion. Now, on the issue of money, whilst they cite the amount of money that ADF has at its disposal, I thought it would be interesting just to look at the Good Law Project and see that in actual fact they have £5 million income in the last financial year, down a bit from just over £6 million in 2022. But also to point out that the Good Law Project is well associated with Mermaids, leading UK LGBTQ plus charities, and the Good Law Project appeal the LGB Alliance charity status. So in effect, this private member's bill, although not of very great consequence in the scheme of parliamentary debate, in actual fact, does bring out some very, very important issues concerning abortion, but also the enormous influences upon those that are espousing, in particular, the pro-choice views.
Thanks, Charles. Okay, we're going to end very briefly with the latest fear porn from the British government, and because Oliver Dowden is in the process of announcing this new website from gov.uk today. How would you prepare for an emergency? Emergencies such as flooding, fires and power cuts can affect us all. There's simple and effective steps you can take to be more prepared. And of course, one way that you can be more prepared is to make sure that you've got your emergency alerts switched on your mobile phones. But if we put that back on screen again for a second, we can see that if an emergency did happen in your area, how would you manage? What about your relatives, friends, neighbours or colleagues? Did you know anyone who might need some extra help or support? They've got a prepper page here, Get Prepared for Emergencies. Emergencies happen every day, apparently. But anyway, this is the kit that you need. So you need a battery or wind-up torch. You need portable power bank, you need a battery or wind-up radio, you need spare batteries, you need a first aid kit, you need a hand sanitizer and wet wipes. And we know that's in case of Novichok attack. You need bottled water and you need non-perishable food. And finally, you need baby supplies. It doesn't specify that you only need those if you have a baby, but you certainly need them according to this. And they say here, rather than buying all the items at once, you could just add to your emergency kit when you're able and build it up over time. So there you go. Get ready, get prepared. Emergencies are coming. Well, we'll leave it there. There's a whole website there for you to go and have a look at. Okay, so we will leave it there for today. Thank you very much to Charles and Vanessa for joining us. Thank you for watching. We'll be back in a couple of minutes if you're a UK Column member for some extra. And if you're not a UK Column member, please consider joining us. As I say, we do need your support. And it does get you access to the extra program that we produce every time we have a news program. So join us for that if you can. We'll see you there. But otherwise, have a great couple of days. We'll be back 1 p.m. as usual on Friday. Don't forget the interview 1 p.m. tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.